this meeting, and as a continuation of APPs, since on Tuesday we had presentation from entities, and today we are going to receive a presentation from MRC regarding their APP and also a budget for this financial year. You are all welcome, honorable members, and hoping that you will work together to make sure that we proceed accordingly, and we will work together as this study group, honorable members. Honorable members, as I welcome you all who have logged into this visual meeting for this committee. Therefore, honorable members, before maybe we start, Ms. Machalamba, if you can just confirm the attendance register for members who have managed to log in to this portfolio committee, and also apologies. I will hand over to you.
Thank you, Acting Chair. Present is Ms. Keller, Dr. Harvard, Mr. Klaba, Mr. Dlamini, Dr. Janine, Ms. Clark, Ms. Wilson, Dr. Tembekwayo, Ms. Chura, and Mr. Van Staden. I've received an apology from Ms. Sukers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Machalamba. Members, those are the apologies that we are noting.
Sorry, Chairperson, I didn't hear my name. Sheikh Imam.
Ms. Machalamba, it's because Sheikh, you registered yourself as iPhone XR. Maybe that's why. If you can just rename your gadget so that you can be acknowledged.
No, iPhone XR is me, Clark, but I'm able to now get onto my computer. I was battling because we have load shedding, Member Gela. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. You are also noted, members, that you are part of the meeting by Ms. Machalamba. Members, before we continue with the meeting, I just want to remind you, honorable members, before we proceed, I would like to remind you that this visual meeting is deemed to be in presence of Parliament, and therefore constitutes on a meeting of a committee of the National Assembly for official purposes only. In addition to the rules of visual sittings, the rules of the National Assembly include the rules of debate apply. Members enjoy the same powers and privileges that apply in a sitting of the National Assembly. Members should equally note that anything said in the visual platform is deemed to have been said to the House and may be ruled upon. All members who have logged in shall be considered to be present and are requested to mute their microphones and only unmute when recognized to speak. This is because microphones are very sensitive and will pick up noise which might disturb the attention of other members. When recognized to speak, please unmute your microphone and connect your video. Members may make use of the icon on their bar at the bottom of their screen, which has an option that allows a member to put up or his or hence raise point of order. The Secretariat will assist the chairperson, will assist in alerting the chairperson to a member requesting to speak. When using a visual system, members are urged to refrain or desist from unnecessary point of order or interjection. We shall now proceed with the business of the day, honorable members. As I indicated, those are the rules of a visual platform. I was reminding you, members, we'll go straight to item 3, where we'll now get a MRC a brief a presentation on their APP and budget. I'm going to recognize their team leader. The vice president will also introduce the team so that at least we know who is part of his team or her team moving forward. So I'm going to hand over to the vice president to give us the presentation.
Good afternoon, Honourable Chair and members of the committee. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present this afternoon. I'm Professor Liesl Zucker, I'm the Vice President, and I would like to start by acknowledging all the members here today, but also to provide apologies from our President and CEO, Professor Glenda Gray. She is with the Minister of Health and the DG of the WHO this afternoon and is unfortunately unable to join us. I'm going to hand over at this point to the Vice President of the Vice Deputy Chair of our board, Professor Bonginkosi Chiliza, to lead us first through the first few slides, and then I will take over and introduce our team when he hands back over to me. Professor Chiliza, over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Zulka, and good afternoon to the committee. And we are really grateful for this opportunity to present the annual performance plan. My name is Professor Bonga Chiliza. I'm the Deputy Chairperson of the Board of the South African Medical Research Council. And also would like to extend my apologies for the Chair of the Board, Professor Jimmy Mahlangu, who was not able to be with us today. I think we have a number of board members that are with us, and of course we have the Executive Management Committee with us this afternoon. So maybe without further ado, can I just want to say first to thank you very much to the Minister of Health, who has also looked at our annual performance plan and has endorsed the South African Medical Research Council's annual performance plan, and was grateful of the guidance of our chairperson, Professor Mahlangu, and our CEO, Professor Glenda Gray. What I would really like to say from the board is that, we are a newly constituted board of the South African Medical Research Council. We started in October last year, and we've got our 3-year term. And we are very grateful to the executive management team who will be doing the presentations this afternoon. And we obviously are aware that our role is different as the board versus the management, everyday management from the executive committee management team. So what we'd like to just say is that we also support this annual performance plan as will be presented today as the board. And we think that it is an important plan, and it's really very much relevant and responsive to the needs of our people as we lead this organization that is doing research for our people in South Africa and across the continent. So with just those few words, I'd like to hand over back to you, Professor Liesl Zucker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Chiliza. This is a statement by our SAMRC President and CEO, Professor Glenda Gray, again, just noting her apologies. And really our performance agreement speaks to the 5 strategic pillars. So that is administrating health research in an effective and efficient manner, the generation of new knowledge and its translation into policy and practice, something actually mentioned by your Minister of Health this morning, supporting innovation and technology transfer to improve health, building health research capacity in the country, and research translation. And we've pioneered multiple innovations, developed novel treatment regimes, vaccine development, diagnostic tools, new drugs and devices, and all of this has really been aimed at improving the health status of people in Africa. To note, one of our programs is the Mid-Career Scientist Program, which helps to create a new generation of science leaders. The vast majority of these are women and Black, and transformation in science is an important part of our strategy. These are the beneficiaries of our master's, doctorate, and other capacity development programs. The SAMRC president has also alluded to the fact that we live and work in a tight fiscal environment, but regardless, we've delivered on impactful science and done so effectively, efficiently, and also consistently. There are multiple partnerships across multiple frontiers, and these are really critical in furthering our mission. And some of the clear partnerships around COVID-19, we demonstrated our ability to pivot our research funding and our research strategies to be able to work in this area in such a profound way. We also then built on that in terms of our relationships with Afrigen and BioVac, and then collaborated with international partners such as Dr. Patrick Sean-Cheong, to collaborate not only in scholarships, but also to improve biomanufacturing expertise in the country so that we can also decrease unemployment and create new employment strategies in this very important area. I'm going to deal with some of our constitutional and policy mandates. Most importantly is our vision is to build a healthy nation through research, innovation, and transformation. The SAMRC is a pioneering and partnership institution, and our values incorporate excellence, respect, integrity, and citizenship in everything we do. We speak to the Republic of South Africa's Constitution in Chapter 2 around the Bill of Rights, in Chapter 10 around public administration, and then also around finance. And there in particular is important to have procurement that is fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective. And this is dealing with Chapter 13. We also speak to, so I just wanted to move this forward. To legislative mandates. There are multiple laws and acts under which we work. The most important of those for us is the Medical Research Council Act, but that actually follows also the National Health Act and more recently the POPI Act. All of these are very intrinsically involved in everything we do, in particular the PFMA. If we think about our policy mandates and our of course, the National Development Plan and the 2030 objectives are paramount. They position the Republic of South Africa in the world, provide innovative training, education, as well as promoting health, fighting corruption, and ensuring environmental sustainability. We also work with the NHI policy of 2017 and the National Health Insurance Bill of 2019. And fundamental to everything that we do is around sustainable development goals, especially SDG 3 and 5, as well as 10 and 13. Other policy mandates to which we contribute is the midterm strategic framework, 2020 to 2025, and there are elements of everything we do in all of these 7 priorities. Finally, I'll spend a little bit more time on this particular slide because it speaks to some of the other elements that we're involved in, government to government collaborations We're in multiple bilateral agreements, but we also have multilateral agreements. We are a resource not only for our country, but our region in terms of SADC and also our continent. And we work in many areas across these regions. So for example, we're an implementation arm for the NDOH. We host the Glopid R African Regional Hub, just to speak of a few. In terms of our global collaboration, we're an extremely strong partner in many of these collaborations. In BRICS, we do research in TB, HIV, NCDs, genomics, and of course, a leader in COVID-19 research. We've just come from the Healthy Lives Trajectory Initiative meeting, attended by both the Minister of Health as well as the DG of Health, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus. And this is a collaboration with China, India, and Canada. And in fact, the South African site, based in Soweto, is one of the leading lights in this project, also leading the research committee. We are a community of funders. The Healthy collaboration is also a community of funders, but there are multiple other partnerships. I've noted them there, NRAF, EDCTP, Newton Fund, etc. And many of those partnerships are funding projects not only in South Africa, but across the region. And then other interventions, we've shown our flexibility and resilience as we pivoted towards COVID-19 research. We also do that, for example, pivoting one of our programs that looked at COVID surveillance now to measles surveillance when we recognized that there was an uptake in measles. Focusing now on governance and human resources. Thank you again to Professor Chiliza for joining us this afternoon. He's part of our new board, which is chaired by Professor Johnny Mahlangu. We have 13 other distinguished scientists, and I'd like to acknowledge all of those that are on the call today that really support and direct the workings of the SAMRC. We have a legal expert and a finance PFMA expert. And then this is, of course, also our president. The National Department of Health has a seat on the board. This is in an observer capacity, but also provides important direction and advice. These are our board members. Again, I draw your attention, Prof. Mahlangu, the chairperson, Prof. Chiliza, the vice chairperson. I believe that Prof. Tucker is on the call, Professor Naledi is on the call, and I believe one or two others as well that may have joined a little bit later. So just to acknowledge them and thank them for their presence. The SAMRC structure below the board is our president with the chief executive officer and our EMC, which is our executive management committee, and some of these are in the room with me today or on the call. So our chief research operations manager is Dr. Mongezi Mbluli, who's going to do some of the presentation today. Online, we have Dr. Michelle Mulder, who's the Grants, Innovation and Product Development Executive. In the room, we have Ms. Ntoza Bam, who is our Executive Director of Human Resources. Online, we have Mr. Nick Buick, he's our Chief Financial Officer. And also on the line is Professor Angela Matier, who is our Transformation Executive. Our General Counsel is not able to be with us today, and our CEO is not able to be with us today. In the room here is also Mr. Philip Duplessis, who is from our financial office, as well as Ms. Amanda Sickle, who's providing administrative support. And so I'd like to acknowledge all the members that are here today. Here they are, and we will also be providing different sections of this presentation will come from different members, alluding to their areas of speciality, and we will also answer questions, and so you can address questions at the end to any of these areas. So just turning to our staff profile, I know the numbers are quite small, but hopefully you can see it on your own screens. We have 681 employees at the MRC as at the 31st of March 2022. This was at the end of the last auditor financial reports. 52% of them are Black, and almost 70% are women. This is the breakdown of the top management, so the EMC profile, again, as at the 31st of March, 2022, again, noting 62% of the EMC are women. And this is the senior management profile, again, at the 31st of March, 2022. You can see 52% women and a range of demographics on the right as well. So I'm going to address our transformation strategy, which is an integral and critical part of us progressing as an institution towards a more inclusive and economically vibrant society. And we believe this is a very important part of what we are doing. And we are approaching it from a multi-dimensional perspective, all the way from individual transformation and development and talent management, all the way through to special initiatives to change the demographics of the organization, particularly at senior management and executive levels. We're also addressing things like digital transformation, internal growth, gender equity and equality, as well as leadership development, and including specific programs such as diversity workshops, leadership training, and coaching. And all of this is to understand and promote the value of diversity to create an inclusive, non-racist, and gender-sensitive organizational culture. Two examples of this is the Bongani Mayosi National Health Scholars Program. This is a flagship PhD program. It's a national asset to create the next generation of African health and clinical scientists. It's administered by the SAMRC, and over the last period, we've graduated 98 graduates, 85 PhDs, 13 MScs in various health professions, and notably the 150 awards have gone to 70% Black and 78% female recipients. Building our internal leadership pipeline is also very important to us. We believe in talent management, and this is the last 6 deputy directors that were appointed within the MRC. We review all our programs and ensure that they fit for purpose, and are looking at how we can make sure that this program focuses on Black scientists that are emerging and growing, and scientists that are living with disability. So our health priorities and research, again, very small font on the right, but just to focus, those are some smaller details, but the research programs are around health promotion and disease prevention, maternal, child and women's health, HIV, TB, and other communicable diseases, including COVID-19, health system strengthening, public health innovation, and of course, the biomedical research platform. A good example again of this is our wastewater-based SARS-CoV-2 tracker sites and our surveillance system, up and running very soon after COVID hit, but also has been an opportunity for capacity development across all of the different sites and units. You can see that we're virtually across the whole country, and also focusing on some of the universities and tertiary education, such as the University of Fort Hare, where perhaps some of the previous work was not focused. In addition to this, surveillance system has resulted in significant capacity development in terms of honors, masters, and PhD students, several of whom have graduated already. And it's also an extremely responsive system, so has pivoted now to looking at other areas of interest, for example, measles. Our genomics unit has just grown tremendously over the last 3 to 4 years. You can see just from the from the human resources perspective, from 2 research technologists to 6. But also in terms of the capacity, you can see we've gone from doing 1 or 2 major things to a whole host of sequencing. And this actually presents a huge resource for the country and for the region. We support innovation led by Dr. Michelle Mulder in many different ways, all the way from SAMRC approved diagnostics to a pipeline for mRNA vaccines, as well as the human workforce development program that needs to underline all of these processes with our collaborations with TIA and DSI. And then our collaborations are very deeply entrenched and speak to long-standing relationships, but we also build new ones as we go along each time. These are some new ones that we are presenting. So together with the NRF, we have just been welcomed into the Human Frontier Science Program, which really speaks to high-level blue sky scientific explorations. Interestingly, many Nobel Prize winners have been funded through this program, and we look forward to that applying to South Africa in the future. We've been collaborating with the George Institute, with their newly elected CFO and the Africa department. They're based in Sydney. And then we also have a NRF SARCI chair in biostatistics, an area of critical need. We work with the Department of Health around National Cancer Registry, and we're just about to launch an SAMRC NRF mental health in rural communities chair in the Limpopo province. At this point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Professor Dr. Mdluli.
Thank you, Professor Zoke, and thank you, Honorable Chair and members. I'll take you briefly around our strategic goals, starting with Program 1, Strategic Goal 1, which has 2 indicators, just to indicate that right from 2019 up to the end of our strategic plan, our goal is to achieve a clean audit, as well as for our second indicator, which is a percentage of the budget, total budget that we spend on administration. Our hope is not to exceed 20%. I would draw your attention to the estimated performance of 2022-2023, where we indicate the 20%. Then Program 2, this is looking at our leading the generation of new knowledge, as the Prof. Zoka indicated. Again here, you would see that our estimated performance for 2022-2023 for indicators, it's 700, 180, 420, and 150. I have to state that these targets are taken from our strategic plan, which we will be starting to look at doing the consultation for the new strategic plan that will take us beyond 2025. You would note that the last column, we have a 2025-2026, and we do not have any goal. It's because this is outside the strategic planning period. Goal 3, which is our innovation, as indicated by Prof. Zoke, around led by Dr. Mulder. We have 3 indicators in there, and you would note that the last indicator, 3.2.1, we've got a target of 3. It's because this relates to the intramural research unit. We've got 2 arms of research unit which are based at the universities, and then we have the intramural research units which are in the MRC. They are not mostly into innovation, but we have one unit here that's being innovation over the period. Hence, we've got such a low estimated performance of 1. And then Program 3, this is now building a pipeline of new researchers. There are 5 goals, and this is mostly concentrated in terms of the historically disadvantaged institution, as well as the historically disadvantaged individuals. So this is building a pipeline of MSc and PhDs, as well as the postdocs and early career and mid-career scientists. We have to state in 2022, 2020, 2021, 2022, our performance was below the target, and there was a reason for that, was that we've been struggling to get people to apply for these, and the board directed us to go to the institution and do a SWOT analysis. Dr. Miller was good, and she did the consultations, and these SWOT analysis will be presented to the board. We already presented, but the update on that. And then we've got Program 5. We attended the meeting on healthy, as indicated by Prof. Zoke, and the question was, how do we transfer knowledge into policy and practice? And this is what this goal is trying to achieve. Our president has always said that innovation is innovation. If it cannot take it from bench to bed, it's useless. So This is a new goal that we started with a new strategic plan, and we're planning to take it forward beyond the strategic planning period. Chair, this is all from me. I'll hand over to our CFO to take over through the finances. Nick.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Mongezi. And good afternoon, members. I'll just take you briefly through the finance slides. This first slide is basically our overall strategy as we move into the new MTF period. I've focused on the income and the expenditure and give you some idea with regard to trends. If one looks at the historic growth in our income over from 2019-20 to 22-23, you can see it's totaled 7%, but if you take that over each year, on average is 2.3%, so below inflation, unfortunately. And then also going forward, we're projecting an increase to 10.3%, a slight increase to 3.3% per annum over the MTF period going forward. On the expenditure side, historically, we've seen a 19.8% spend, a growth over the last 2019-20 to 22-23, which is an average rate per annum of 6.2%, and then projected a smaller growth of 2.2%, which is an average rate of 0.7% per annum, in line with the lower anticipated revenue. As a result of that constricted outlook with regard to income, both from government and then also on the contract funding side, we've obviously had to be very, very circumspect in terms of our projection with regard to spending. And as a result, you will see that we will only be funding critical new posts and obviously manage our posts very, very circumspectly to ensure that we stay within our overall salary budget. We're projecting that salaries will increase at an average rate of 6.3% over the MTF period, and while goods and services will actually decrease at an average rate of 3%. We will be giving priority to projects which will leverage funding, so where we can contribute with our collaborators in equal amounts or less amounts, so that we can use that funding to generate at least equivalent funding from our funders, so that we can actually double, if you like, the actual funding that is applied to various projects. We are budgeting for a deficit in 23, 24, 25 million. We have obviously had permission to actually budget for a deficit, and just to let the committee know that this deficit will be funded from our own reserves. We have been able to generate reserves through the recovery of costs against major contracts, both directly from our research scientists and also recovery of our overhead costs against these contracts. And this enables us to actually generate reserves to fund deficits, which we will be doing in this case. And then risk going forward, the MRC will continue to utilize baseline funding to leverage additional funds for research and innovation from local and international funders, including donors, philanthropic organizations, private foundations, and development funds. And we've also recently, through our social impact bonds, been able to attract investment in the organization from local private listed companies on the JSE as well. Then just going forward into our detailed budget, I think the key area is the 23-24 medium-term estimate, which is a budget moving forward into the 23-24 year, which has been approved by the board. Our total revenue we're projecting at 1.3 billion. That's made up of two key areas. The 515 million rand non-tax income is made up of 466 million rand from local and international funders, what we call our contract income. And then we have other non-tax income, which is 48 million, which is mainly made up of interest on our cash deposits, as well as leasing, where we lease some of our buildings. And then the other area is our baseline grant from the Department of Health, projected at 797 million, which making up the 1.3 billion. Then obviously matching that with our expenditure, compensation of staff, 464 million, goods and services 743 million, a depreciation of plant and equipment 26 million. That basically gives us total costs of 1.3 billion, coming down to the small deficit of 25.8 million, and then projecting going forward a break-even budget for the other 2 years of the MTF. Next slide, please. Then lastly, just breaking down the total costs, the total budget into the major strategic goals. The total expenses I mentioned of 1.3 billion rand for the new year, broken down into administration of 234, it's 17%, again projected at below the 20% target, so more efficient than we've projected, which enables us to actually allocate more of those costs through to our core research activities, which are research sitting at 50% of our total costs, down slightly from 54% of the last historic period. Innovation and technology up from 22 to 24% over the MTF period of 315 million. Capacity development up slightly from 5.9% to 6.7 to 93 million. And then our new strategic objective, which has just been mentioned, research translation starting off on a low base of 3.3 million and projected to move to 4.3 million over the MTF period. Thank you very much. I'll hand back to Liesl. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Buick, and thank you for that overview. We, in the last section, we're going to just reflect on some of the knowledge translation, dissemination, and community development that we're involved in. This is Generation Science, Gen S. It's a youth month job shadowing program, mostly from schools in the area. But you can also see that the young people, these are in grade 10 and 11, spend a month with us doing active job shadowing. They are taught basic skills in the lab, and we hope that this will encourage a new generation of STEM interested folk. It's been an incredible journey with them, and we always enjoy having them. We have a regular set of international delegation visits, each of them often focusing on different areas. So the top left is the visit from Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State of the US. You can see that was actually on Women's Day last year. And so we presented several very innovative and interesting research projects from women across South Africa, from Afrigen, all through the way to a PhD student. You may note Dr. Naledi Pandor there standing alongside Professor Glenda Gray. The next two pictures are of our recent high-level government meeting with China, where we actually focused on our genomics unit. And our interaction with the US has been across the bottom, where we've actually focused on specific events such as vaccines as well as women in science. So this was that recent delegation focused again on vaccine development and pandemic preparedness and responsiveness, but we've actually followed that up quite recently with several more engagements around the need for a consolidated approach to cancer. We're also very much involved in the community in which each of the SAMRC sites are working and living. This is in our nearby area here, where we visited a local senior center on World Diabetes Day, which include active discussion, information, as well as screening of the older folk at the center. I'm not quite sure why that happened, so I'm just going to pull this up. I hope you are able to see it. This is our World Diabetes Day, a community fun run, also through one of the local areas, both 5 and 10 kilometers. So actively putting health and healthy nation and wellness into our community. This was our local annual Scientific Merit Awards. This was a wonderful occasion, not only to recognize some of the amazing scientists in Africa, but also our internal scientists that have grown through the SAMRC. And we were able to recognize all the way from bronze all the way to platinum, as well as our SAMRC CEO's Presidential Award. Professor Glenda Gray is very well known for her amazing work in HIV, recognized today, in fact, by the DG of the WHO. And so World AIDS Day is one of the important days that we celebrate. All of the celebrations that happen at the MRC happens at all 4 sites. And so very much a joint institution-wide initiatives. And then finally, corporate social responsibility. This is some of our young people and our families cleaning up the beaches in and around, I think it was near Strandfontein and Lagoon Beach, and feeling very much that when we want our recipients and our participants to be the change, we have to do the same. So at this point, I am going to thank you for the opportunity to have presented our slides. I'm going to once again just reiterate the apologies from our President and CEO, acknowledge all the members of the EMC, thank also and acknowledge the members of our board, and I hand back to Professor Chiliza for closing words. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice President, with your team for the presentation. I'm going to open for discussion. Members, let me check on the chat group. I see the hand of Honorable Kaba, Honorable Chinine, Honorable Stumo, Honorable Chirwa. Those are the hands, Honorable Wilson. Those are the hands for discussions. I'm going to start with Honorable Kaba. In that sequence, honorable members, Honorable Clark will be the last one to speak. Thank you. Members, over to you.
Thank you, Chairperson, and congratulations on you having to lead us, and to all members. I think we pledge our support to your leadership. Thank you, Chair. Chair, just my question will relate to, I think I may have 2 questions. What are the additional steps that the entity will take to reach 20% target for strengthening administrative efficiency under program? Perhaps if those steps could be outlined. But Chair, secondly, I've heard Mongezi mentioning that there was a difficulty on reaching or on their performance reaching, wherein people were unable to apply. I don't know whether determined that they couldn't recruit, that they had to do the SWOT analysis. Will this relate to even voluntary applications? Perhaps the SWOT analysis matter, who was heading it? I'm just worried, was it because of scarce skills or what? Thanks, Chair.
Honorable Chinine, you are the next.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you also for the presentation. I would just like to ask one question. Are there any strategic partnerships areas that the Department and Portfolio Committee can consider to improve the output areas in terms of research links and capacity building? Thank you.
Honorable Stumo.
Thanks very much, Chairperson. should start by saying I highly appreciate the presentation that has been done on this work by the SAMRC, and indeed quite fulfilling in our dream as a country to contribute both positively in the country, but also in the other areas like Africa and SADC, but also the world over. The organization comes out very, very clear. Though I was gonna ask, I'm yet to ask the very same question for you, Vice Chair, to clarify on the work that is done in the region. I'm asking that question because there was in some parts of the country. I know that in Sudan, currently they are discussing whether there should be an end to the war, and people are dying in that session. The role that the SAMRC plays, of course, could be disturbed in that situation, where I hear even hospitals are closed or are not operating because of the war. How do such things affect the work of SAMRC? That's my question. Thank you very much.
Honorable Chirwa.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Greetings to all the colleagues, and thank you to the SAMRC for the presentation that they gave us. I want to ask a few questions. I'll just come back to the presentation a bit later on. On that report that you guys released on unsafe sex and alcohol abuse being leading factors behind deaths and diseases, stating causes and stuff like that. I want to know if there has been a progression of a deeper diagnosis on the causes of that kind of social behavior, and also like the intervention strategies that are devised by the MRC to respond to these issues, because I don't think we're doing it correctly in the NDOH, because these are issues that continue to persist. And if we need other external stakeholders outside of the NDOH, in regards of the basis and the context, adequately diagnosing and responding to these issues, because they influence so many other parts like intimate partner violence and femicide and all those things. So I want to know from you guys in here on this particular thing. And secondly, on the issue of air quality management, you guys have stated that air pollution is a health hazard for unborn babies, but there was a vague sense of understanding the true intensity of this issue in the provinces that you named, in correlation to this particular, the Gauteng, Limpopo, and I think Mpumalanga. Can you just give us like a numeric or quantity analysis of this particular problem? So, and also the areas, what are these hotspot areas that you speak about? And thirdly, in 2021, I remember we spoke about the issue of you guys not having funded enough Black, I don't know if it was researchers. At the time it was 37% in 2021. Can we have an update on what that number has improved to be now in 2023? Because I do remember that we specifically said, the comments from the EFF, the portfolio committee specifically asked that you guys change this to be reflective of the demographics in the country. I think it was you together with SAPRA and another entity that are lagging behind in aligning the demographics of the country and the money that you spend on funding people and interns and all of those things. I see your update on them on, I don't know, but the update that you gave is not as numeric as the ones that you usually give us at the end of the year. I'm assuming that you're leaving that part for the end of the year to tell us about your legacy projects of, you know, seeing more Black women ascend to managerial positions or senior positions in the entity. And number 4, I want to find out what the reason is for utilizing private laboratories and not the NHLS, or developing your own internal capacity as an entity that will always be using this, that will always be needing this service. And another issue that I pick up is that your targets are not matching what you guys are spending, or the budget spending. I didn't get the adequate explanation of this on why your targets have decreased, but you continue using the same amount of money or even more. And also the research. Does the MRC have research that is done on the real impact of adverse effects of COVID-19 vaccines? And if there is, can you please appraise the committee with that particular research? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Honorable Wilson.
Thank you, Acting Chair, and thank you to the MRC. I think we can say quite comfortably and without a doubt, this is one entity that generally shines. I think you guys do outstanding work. I think you have got recognition principally the world over for the wonderful work and innovation that you've carried out, particularly as far as AIDS and those kinds of things are concerned. And generally financially, you perform very well, and we have nice audit outcomes from you. So from that perspective, I think the MRC does exceptionally well and makes us exceptionally proud. But there are a couple of issues I'd like to raise. Some of my questions have been asked by previous colleagues. At the outset of your presentation, you talked about being compliant in terms of what you were doing with the NHI, or and you said the NHI bill specifically. It is a bill that is not passed yet. So if you can give us clarification on what is meant by that. You talked about a deficit of millions in your income and expenditures. There was a deficit. I forget what it was, 36 million, I think, in the current year. Now that's quite substantial. That's a lot of money, and that kind of deficit obviously has a huge impact on performance. Okay, so somewhere along a line, it's going to affect you. And can you tell us how you're going to get around that? I wanted to raise the NAPISA bill. Okay. It has been signed. It was signed by the president in August, I think, of 2020. Not yet promulgated. How is this affecting you? And will you be involved in this? And you know, how is this affecting you that it is not passed? I think it's quite important. In the presentations that we had over the last couple of days, there were highlights on the population who are being affected by hypertension, diabetes, HIV, those kind of diseases. And yet cancer never seems to come up on these figures. Now, I know that the MRC does a tremendous amount of work in terms of cancer, and cancers are varying. We also know it's on the increase, quite considerably on the increase in South Africa. And South Africa is obviously not prepared to deal with it, in that we don't have enough centers, very few centers, to do the various radiation and chemotherapy that is required. And we all know that if many cancers, if treated quickly and early, can be halted or certainly slowed down, and yet we don't have the facilities to do this in South Africa. I'm not sure if any one of you there are in a position to tell us, but can you tell us what cancer is doing? Are these increases as real as they are perceived to be? I think we're all being affected by somebody or another with cancer. And what exactly your proposals are to do to deal with the increases, and how we're going to manage this in the future. That's all from me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Clark.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the MRC for the presentation. And I also would like to acknowledge the good work you guys do, and us as members of Parliament are always very proud of this department and what they achieve. By being last in the queue always amounts to most of your questions being asked. Although there are just a few things that I'd like to add, because I've been covered by a lot of the previous speakers. Firstly, the performance for the program 2 to 5 seems impressive, but what are the targets, and can the estimated performance be seen as targets? And if so, why are the targets so much less in the previous year's audited performances? And how do the MRC intend to address the threats of diminishing funding for research, classified as low priority on the political agenda, and a lack of research translation? And then also today I just received some answers or questions I put through to the Minister, and it's extremely alarming what I've received back. That since 2015 to currently, more than 178,000 children between the ages of 0 and 5 have died in our public hospitals, mostly due to pneumonia and diarrhea. And I thought I'd pose this to the MRC today to see if there's any way you can be a role player in order to mitigate these huge numbers. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Harvard.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, MRC, for the nice presentation. That is excellent work. I just have one question. What informs decrease in targets under Program 2 and Program 4? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, honorable members, for the questions. Before I hand over to the MRC to respond, I think as a chair I must also welcome the presentation, but also in your presentation under the structure, the 60% that are women, we really appreciate that that women are leading in MRC, which is a good sign for women empowerment. We really appreciate that work, and also the recognition of women in MRC. But also your presentation is straightforward. Good work indeed that you are doing. I must join Honorable Clark, really that the presentation was very good, and the work that you are doing. It seems that you know that we are serving the people of South Africa, and you are committed to your work, which is a good thing. Coming to one issue that I want to raise, although you have presented, but for more clarity, in the allocation to the core departments for 2023-2024 financial year for HIV, TB, etc., shows a significant really decrease. I just want to check how will the deficit be mitigated by MRC. That will be my only question towards the MRC. Now I'm going to hand over to the Vice President for response. Over to you, Vice President.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair, for those questions, and for the committee members that offered those questions. We certainly appreciate them. We're going to take the questions as a team. The first questions were around additional steps for reaching our targets. And so I'm going to hand over to Dr. Mvuli to answer that question.
Thank you, Professor Zoka. So the question on the 20%, so I think there was a slide where Mr. Buick indicated that we'll only be funding critical costs. And that's exactly how we're going to approach that target. So most of the money, the target is 80% should be spent on research, of which is about 40% intramural and 40% extramural. So we'll only be funding costs that are critical, but also making sure that we leverage funding from external funders in order to reach that goal.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ndluli, for that. The next question was a very interesting question around the applications that came from HDIs and the SWOT analysis. And that was actually led by Dr. Mulder. So I'm just going to hand over to her to address that question.
Thank you, Professor Zilka. So we have, as has been mentioned, conducted a SWOT analysis of the HDIs, and this is really to better understand why we are getting so few applications and specifically what the challenges are at the institutions related to this. So overall, we have a fairly low application rate from the HDIs coming into our calls, both for our grant mechanisms and for our research capacity development initiatives. And what we've really found, we've done a questionnaire, we've analyzed our own statistics, and we have had in-person engagements with the HDIs. And there are a number of factors involved. I think the key thing is that we're not really getting the numbers because the research intensity at these institutions is obviously lower than at some of the other institutions, and although it is building. And sorry, I think there's somebody who's not on mute, but let me continue. So, overall, the research intensity is the one thing. The second thing is that where there is research happening, not all of this is in the health field. There are a number of other fields in which research is happening, and obviously we are interested in those researchers who are working in the health field. Thirdly, those who are working in the health field are not always working in the priority areas in which we put out calls. We've actually started to tailor our calls more towards those areas that are strengths within the HDIs. Another key issue that we found is that there is actually a shortage of qualified staff within the universities, the HDIs, particularly at those with PhDs and those at postdoctoral level. They are graduating, they're getting their PhDs, and then they are leaving the institutions for other institutions, both locally and abroad. So one of the key difficulties for these institutions is retaining their trained staff. So overall, I mean, we will be sharing the report with everybody and we'll be presenting it to the board. And it really has been incredibly valuable in us now utilizing that information to design new tailor-made programs. But I think overall, we need to address the research intensity and tailor our calls more towards the specific needs of the HDIs. Thanks, Professor Zilka.
Thanks very much, Dr. Mulder, for that, and also for leading that program. So the next question was from the Honourable North Nagel, and asking about strategic partnerships and if there were any that we particularly focused on. And this is around building more research capacity building in areas of need. A very good example of this is the NRF SARC chair in biostatistics, as well as the about to be launched chair in mental health in rural communities. So these are two, for example, areas that were identified as scarce and critical skills by statistics, and a new area that we are very much aware of as a growing issue in our country is the issue of mental health. So there is a constant pivoting and awareness of new research priorities, new issues of note to our population, and then the strategic links are built around that. We enjoy the opportunity of bilateral or even trilateral links. So, for example, the NRF SAMRC chair in mental health in rural communities is also in collaboration with the university of Limpopo. So it's a three-way funded chair. And so that is more and more the approach, that the strategic partnership is around the area of priority, and that also goes as far as possible with leveraged funding. I hope I've answered that. I don't know, Shelley, you are very much involved also with strategic partners. Is there anything you'd like to add on that particular point?
Thanks, Professor. So one thing I would like to add, and I think the question was really about how the DOH can facilitate and support such initiatives. And I'd really like to highlight the Bongani Mayosi National Health Scholars Program, which has received immense support from the department and from the Public Health Enhancement Fund over a number of years. Just to mention that we are on the last couple of years of the PHEF funding at the moment, and we understand that they will be doing a review of the program before committing further. So that is one area where we would really appreciate support from the National Department to encourage future investments, both from the private sector, but also from the department. We acknowledge and appreciate the latest tranche of funding, which we have received directly from the National Department of Health for a new cohort of scholars specifically aimed at HDIs. And in fact, the call for that went out earlier this week. So we're hoping to get a nice new cohort. Just to mention, though, that funding at the moment is only for a single year, and we would like to appeal to the National Department of Health to see that through so that we have funding for these scholars for the next 3 to 4 years, so to graduate that cohort. So in summary, if we could continue to rely on the support of the National Department together with the private sector partners at the PHEF to extend and expand this program, because it has been incredibly successful, and we would like to achieve the goal of 1,000 PhDs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mulder, for that. I'm going to address the next question, if I may. Honourable Minister Dumore spoke to us about the work in the region, and I think he drew our attention to vulnerable populations, especially around research areas. And we did have it on one of the slides, but I do know we went quite quickly through the slides, that we work in the region and in the continent, not just in the country. And sometimes that work is in kind rather than that we're funding the projects in the region. A good example is Cochrane, as well as EDCTP, which is really based in, so Cochrane Africa is based here and EDCTP is based here, but both of these two entities work right across the region. We're also very well aware of the issue of vulnerable populations. It in some way is our research bread and butter, that we understand research populations, whether they enrolled in our study or whether their staff is enrolled in our study. So we also was very involved in our personal staff at the time of the floods in the last year, in the time of the Jagersfontein mine disaster, and that's also often accompanied by new research questions, not only to investigate them, but also how to prevent them from happening. Another particular example that was brought up there was the issue of Sudan. And it is important to note that almost all of us who come from a scientific background continue working as research scientists. I personally work with our colleagues in Sudan and in Ethiopia. And so much of the work that we've done over the last year has obviously been affected by the internal situations, but have not stalled. So we have provided support in terms of data management, in terms of new innovative ways of collecting data, much of which was developed during COVID-19. A very good example, again, is the Healthy study, which is Healthy Lives Trajectory Initiative, which is a study of preconception care, and then 5 years after that. It's about a decade's worth of work, and that started just as COVID happened. And in none of the areas, so that's South Africa, they work in Soweto, run by community health workers, as well as India, China, rural China, and and Canada, in the First Nations peoples, did the data collection completely come to a halt, or the research protocols, because of some of the support and ideas given from the collaboration, which included the MRC. Two other areas that may interest the honourable committee members is that we have also been seen as a template for how health research councils should work. And so recently presented at the Nigerian Health Research Council, where they just starting to launch a health research council, and gave them several pointers and advice in that regard, as well as our work with the Gambia in a similar kind of way. And then finally, because of the issue of vulnerable populations, we're very much aware of the quadruple burden of disease. And so our work is not just communicable and non-communicable disease, but we're also focusing on all four of those elements: maternal, child, and neonatal health, as well as the issue of violence, injury, and mental health. And so there is a significant proportion of our internal research that is focusing on not only understanding these variables, but also mapping them and then being able to consider focused interventions accordingly. So I hope that addresses some of or most of that question. I'm going to start, perhaps, if I may, again, with Honourable Member Chirwa's question, and her question was related to a report that was issued very recently. And I do want to acknowledge and thank Honourable Member Chirwa for bringing that to our attention, because these are reports that we consistently try to disseminate. This is speaks to our knowledge translation and dissemination mandate. And so we're sending these reports out on a regular basis. They are usually based on research evidence that has been published in scientific journals, but we do try and always ensure that these important data points are going out to the community. This was about unsafe sex and alcohol and intimate partner violence. And that was an exceptionally important study that was done. So the RICE study was recently, I think we're in the third iteration of that study, where we're trying to unpack exactly what Honourable Member Chirwa has asked us about. What are the deeper causes? What are the potential interventions, and how can we change this really quite stark reality of intimate partner violence? We've got 2 units that have been focusing on that in detail. We very happily can send you some of the presentations and the publications. Our gender and health research unit has been focusing on this, as well as our alcohol, tobacco, and substance use research unit. And they have been very closely aligned with the Department of Health. In fact, our unit director spoke directly to and at Parliament around the findings from these papers. So thank you very much. We want to acknowledge that these reports are being read. We are monitoring burden of disease in this areas, and we would be very happy to send through any publications that you would like to have more information about. The next question was around air pollution and children. And again, a very interesting new area, but it's an area of strength of our now transformation executive, but previously the head of the Environmental and Health Research Unit. So I'm going to hand over to Professor Mathieu to give us some more information on this question.
Thank you, Professor Zolter, and thank you to the Honourable Chirwa for the question on air pollution, which is a problem, a public health problem of growing concern in many parts of the world. In South Africa, the typical scenarios for air pollution is people who live very close to busy roads, or children who attend schools close to busy roads.
There also is concern about communities that live downstream of industry, and that includes mining operations and coal-fired power stations. So there's particular concern for the Highveld areas, for the Vaal Triangle, for example, and then also for people who use solid or liquid fuels, any fuels other than electricity. And within that group, there's particular concern as our economy is increasingly challenged, is the notion of cottage industry. So those are people who conduct operations to generate an income inside their homes. It means everyone in the household, pregnant women, everyone, they all become vulnerable. So we do have a very small team of just 4 scientists who work on both air pollution and on climate change, but they really are quite industrious and productive. And they work in partnership with entities like the air quality team at the Northwest University, and they also sit on committees within the Department of Environmental Affairs, for example, and within the National Department of Health, where they share their findings and they call and lobby for escalated action around exposure to air pollution. And they also sit on international bodies. We have someone in our team who sits on the World Health Organization's guideline development group for ambient air quality. And they also have opportunities to feed their findings to various entities within the United Nations. This is important work, which I think the MRC is committed to continuing, especially in the light of the fact that we know as climate change unfolds, air pollution or the health impacts of air pollution are going to increase in significance, especially in areas where it's going to become hotter. And South Africa is one of those parts of the world where a rise in temperature has been predicted. So it really is an important public health problem having significance, and our little research team is really working very hard at generating the research findings to lobby for more action around air pollution, especially also as we understand more deeply that air pollution has an impact on pneumonia, but also I think in the last decade we've begun to understand more clearly how it also impacts on chronic diseases and on cancer, for example. Thanks, Professor Zulke.
Thank you very much, Professor Mathieu. We really acknowledge that question because it's an area of new interest as well as building on the work that we've done in the past. So thank you for that comprehensive answer. The next question was around our numbers related to capacity development. I think Dr. Mulder's answered it quite comprehensively in the previous set of questions. Perhaps she would just like to summarize some of the numbers related to that question. Perhaps I can just add one element, which was the question around interns. And generally, interns are a post within the various departments of health. So that is unfortunately outside of our scope. But it's important to note that in students that lead to internship and potentially would like to do research within the internship period, that is something that is extremely encouraged within the MRC, but we don't have that in our area of influence. So Shelley, is there anything you'd like to just add in terms of final numbers?
Yes, thanks, Professor. So thank you for the honourable member for the question. So we have been tracking over the years the success rate and the proportion of grants that go to Black researchers. You will certainly know from which we've presented in the past, our self-initiated research grants program. We've made a concerted effort particularly to improve the transformation profile and the profiles of our awardees. And in fact, I'm very pleased to report that we have moved from a figure of 27% back in 2012, 27% of those grants going to Black researchers. We're now sitting on 60%. Of those, 32% are to African Black researchers. If we look at our capacity development programs, our scholarships are currently sitting on 89% of awards are to Black scholars, of which 73% are African Black, and our grants, which are career development awards, 87% of our awardees are Black, and 65% of those are African Black. I also just want to acknowledge that, even where we do award grants to non-African researchers, we need to also look more deeply at their profiles. They have a research staff and a student complement that is really has a very high proportion of Black scholars, students, researchers, and up-and-coming researchers who will be the leaders of tomorrow. So I think we're getting the balance between those who are leading the research and those who are leading the next generation of researchers, and obviously those who we're directly supporting in capacity development programs, very focused on historically disadvantaged individuals and institutions.
Great, thank you very much, Dr. Mulder, for those numbers, and also outlining the fact that we also are thinking more comprehensively. So, for example, recently, together with Dr. Mulder, we launched a program around postdocs at our HDIs, which also runs alongside a collaboration with HDAs that are supporting, so that the funds go to the HDIs to ensure that the postdocs remain there, but we also encourage and facilitate collaboration. Our next question was around private laboratories, the National Health Research Laboratory System. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Ndluli, and Dr. Mulder may have something to add at the end of that.
Thank you, Prof. So the response to that question is, honorable members would have noted that in one of the slides on the collaboration, we spoke about the National Health Laboratories. Most of the work that we do internal. For example, the slide that spoke about wastewater, we do the internal testing of SARS-CoV, and where we do not have expertise, we would then take it out to external laboratories. For example, the research carried out by one of our research units in Durban, HITRU, HIV and other diseases, the laboratories have to be accredited, NIH accredited. And we find out most of the labs, particularly probably even including National Health Laboratory Services, they are not accredited. So in that case, we'll have to use an accredited lab such as BARC. So honorable members may have seen that we use quite a lot of services of BARC, and it's because mainly of the work that we carry for NIH that requires a lab to be accredited. Shelley, do you have anything to add?
Thanks, Dr. Ndluli. Just one thing to add is that when we set up laboratory capacity internally, or if we fund it, it's not to replace anything that the NHLS offers in terms of routine diagnostic services. They, as Dr. Ndluli mentioned, it's around research, and we collaborate with the NHLS, so they're part of the networks that we're involved in, for example, the network for genomic surveillance and so on. So we work with them, and we certainly are not there to replace or to find alternatives for diagnostic services that are offered by NHLS laboratories.
Great, thank you very much, Dr. Ndluli and Dr. Mulder, for that. So the next question was about whether we are doing research on the adverse effects of the vaccine, on vaccines, and we acknowledge that question, and also the fact that the way that adverse effects of vaccines are noted is multifactorial. So they are noted in terms of the usual health system, but there's actually a direct approach in terms of logging this at the national health system, a sort of adverse, there's a special form that's filled in at a hospital, and that will go up to the surveillance system, and those are then independently and comprehensively reviewed. So those first go through an adjudication process, and that's quite, it's done, as I say, in a very objective manner, usually with multiple people sitting around a table to review that. So in terms of whether we are conducting research in that area, we're involved in the process because of our Sisonke work, and any adverse effect of any interventional product, whether it's a vaccine or others, when we have been involved in a clinical trial, has to be reviewed by our Data Safety Management Board, by our external adjudicator, and then there is significant investigation into that particular adverse effect. So in every one of our clinical trials, we're involved in that process, although that is perhaps the question was, is there a specific research area? And I would say not a specific research focus, but we are certainly involved in that process because we work in research in randomized controlled trials all the time with multiple controlled trials and multiple interventional products. The final question from the Honourable Member Chirwa was around finance, and I'm going to hand over to Nick and to perhaps Dr. Ndidi as well. So Mr. Buick, over to you.
Thanks, Prof. Yeah, so I think the question was that, around the deficit and the impact of the deficit that it could have on the organisation. As we did mention, the 2023-24 budget is for a small deficit of 25 million rand. This will not be, we're not asking for more money from the fiscus to fund this. This will be funded from our own reserves. The MRC has significant reserves that it has generated over the last few years, and we use that to fund deficits where required, and also our capital expenditure program. So it has been approved by National Treasury, so we have the necessary approvals. We also manage our cash flow quite tightly on a monthly basis. So if there is any significant impact of this on our operations, it certainly will become evident pretty soon to us, and obviously we will take the necessary steps to restrict programs where we can actually reduce the deficit if required. But I certainly do not have any concerns that the deficit is manageable and can be funded from our own reserves. Thank you. I think that was the question. Thanks, Prof.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Buick. I think that that was probably quite a comprehensive answer. So I don't think there's anything else we want to add here. We still have quite a few questions to go through. So I'm going to turn to the question from the Honourable Member Wilson. Thank you very much also for acknowledging our work and our clean audits over the years and the presentation. We very much appreciate that. And you raised a very important question about NHI and the bill, and of course acknowledging that it is not implemented as yet. So there are different ways that we've been aligning with that, as well as preparing for an implementation phase. And one of the most important roles of the SAMRC is to be on various committees, various portfolios, and also looking at the evidence. And here two particular units have played a very major role. So our Cochrane unit, which does evidence-based synthesis around questions such as NHI, has been supportive and working very closely with Department of Health. This work has been led by Shay Charles Wasonge as well as Tamara Credo, and there's several reports and committees that they've been involved in, and that has looked at that in particular. And those are from our intramural unit. From our extramural unit, Priceless, which is Health Economics Unit led by Karen Hoffman, based at Wits University, has also been engaging very directly with members of the Department of Health in terms of priority setting and how these will all be affected by NHI, but also doing the rands and cents of that. And so understanding cost effectiveness analysis, ICEs, where we put our different levels for different levels of intervention is absolutely critical. They recently presented on this in a Lancet study, which also spoke to one of the big issues that we are aware of at the moment, which is the recovery post-COVID, especially the socioeconomic recovery or the lack thereof, and how all of those could potentially align with or integrate with the NHI. So we're not only doing our own research in this areas, the research is also hopefully informing the policy and potentially the implementation and the practice of NHI going forward. You also mentioned the issue of the deficit, and I think Mr. Buick has covered that already. And the next question was around the NAPISA bill, and I'm going to hand over to Professor Mathieu to maybe address that for us.
Thank you, Professor Zolka. I just have a very brief update to say that there have been potentially overlapping roles identified. And these will need to be clarified, but we are part of that conversation with the Department of Health. And in fact, just a couple of weeks ago, Professor Glenda Gray and I were part of a discussion where we presented our views and perspectives, and we will be part. That's not the end of the conversation. We will be part of that going forward as well. Thanks, Professor Zolka.
Thank you very much, Professor Mathieu. The final comment from Honourable Member Wilson was around cancer and a cancer strategy, and we feel very strongly about this. This is a non-communicable disease that is increasing in terms of its prevalence and incidence, with new cancers also being and new cancer diagnostic modalities also happening every day. You spoke very nicely about precision medicine, so the biologics and how that can be focused, but also about diagnostics and management and treatment and some of the gaps that we face in all of those. We have, again, both our inter and extramural units are focusing on this area. So our intramural unit, we've got a non-communicable diseases unit looking at cancer. Our burden of diseases unit looks at cancer. And some of our other units are looking at that as well. For example, with the cancers associated with communicable disease. And there are several extramural focus on this in particular. A recent one was launched by Professor Colette Dendaro, which is looking at precision medicine. We also have one by Professor Zodwa Dlamini, also looking at cancers. And then we also fund two very important cancer initiatives, one focusing on esophageal cancers and the other focusing on cervical cancers. And in these ones, we also look beyond just the cancer. So, for example, a very good strategy is the cervical cancer unit, and their work both in the Eastern Cape and in Khayelitsha here in South Africa, is in Cape Town, is looking at the changes related to cervical cancer and HPV vaccine, seeing a very promising trend in some of the Cape Town site that as HPV vaccines are rolled out, cervical cancer is decreasing. It is profound what has happened in that particular area in the UK, for example, with over 90% coverage with HPV has led to almost 80% decrease in cervical cancers. And so we're tracking those kinds of data here within our own institution and our units. I've just mentioned a few. There probably is significant other interventions also around our SIR grants and our higher level PhDs that are also looking at cancer. So cancer is front and foremost of our NCD strategy. We mentioned the work that we've had or the discussions that we've had with the Mayo around this, and hopefully we can report back on some definitive outcomes in this area going forward. The next questions were again related to our program 2 to 5. I think we've addressed most of those, but Dr. Mdluli, if there's anything addition?
Thanks, Prof. So just to address that question, maybe it's the format of the table that we given by National Treasury in terms of reporting the program. The first 3 columns in terms of the figures, those are actual numbers, they are not the targets. So if you take program 4, for example, you've got 157, 144, 167, and 1. So those 3, they are the actual performance for those financial years. And then the one that says estimated performance, that's the actual target. So maybe next time what we can do for you, honorable members, is to also indicate what was the target against the performance. So the numbers haven't decreased per se. As I've indicated, these are the numbers that came from the strategic plan when we did that, particularly when we did the strategic plan in 2020. So the estimated performance is it's a target, whereas the first 3, they are the actual performances. And then I can address also the next question around the threats of funding, decreased funding for research. Thank you, Honorable Clark, around that question. This is one of our in our SWOT analysis, where we had to draw a SWOT analysis to indicate what could be the challenges for research, and we've seen funding for research has decreased. So how to mitigate that is to keep on knocking on the door of different departments, Department of Health, Department of Science and Innovation, and others, and also through the portfolio committee to assist us to get some more funding for our research. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Dr. Mdluli. So I think there's just one question remaining, because I think that may well address our chair's question about funding allocation for HIV research, which I think speaks to the same point. And that was the question about pneumonia and diarrhea and what we call the surge season in the pediatric terms, what we're seeing in terms of young children dying of infectious diseases. So I am a pediatrician as well as Dr. Glenda Gray. And so this is actually an area of great interest to us, as in what is happening with the resurgence of some of these infectious issues. And some of it is directly related to the COVID era. Obviously, a child who had spent most of COVID indoors has got no natural immunity to some of these issues. It's also very different now in terms of things like hand sanitization and being in creches or in childcare with groups of people. So some of them, or some of the reasons we've been able to unpack. On the other hand, we're also very well aware of the socioeconomic effects of COVID on families, on nutrition, on mental health, the environment in which children are growing up may be very different or worse or affected by the COVID economic situation. And all of these things are the things that we research either independently for our various research programs. Within the Healthy Initiative, for example, we focus very much on the mental health of women that are looking after children. In our child and maternal health sections, we're looking very much at the first 1,000 days. Some of our extramural units are focused on this directly, where we're looking at birth cohorts in 3 or 4 regions of the country. And so these are very much part of the research agenda, and we certainly are addressing them.
Okay.
I see that we have somebody unmuted, but I'll just
Honorable Sheikh Imam,
Yeah.
sorry, Vice President, for that. Honorable Sheikh Imam, can you mute?
People's insurance company. Yes, I agree. Yeah.
Secretary,
You want
can
me
you
to do
mute
the
the
way-
microphone of Honorable Sheikh?
I think it's been muted, so I'm just going to continue. One of the questions was, what is the role that the MRC is playing in this area? And again, it's to conduct, fund, and empower research into this area, which we do at both individual, intramural, and extramural level. And then I think the final question from Honourable Member Harvard was around how do we create the targets? And maybe Ms. Dr. Ndruby can answer that.
Thank you, Prof. So the targets, we set them up, as I've indicated, at the time that we do the strategic plan. Like now we're going to do the consultations with different stakeholders, including other sister public entities, universities, and others. So and then we would go to the different stakeholders within the strategic plan. For example, when we look at program 3, innovation, Professor Dr. Michelle Mulder will be leading there, doing the consultation and setting the targets. Similarly, for program 2, myself and Professor Zoke, including Professor Gray, will be doing the consultations and setting up the targets. So there are different role players allocated to each strategic plan, strategic goal, and they will be driving that in terms of setting the targets. So once the targets are set, then we'll present the same to the MRC board for approval, and subsequently then submitted to our National Department of Health, to the Minister for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ndruby, and thank you very much to my my team members, our team members, for all of the inputs and answers to the questions, which we very much appreciate. The Honourable Chair also mentioned the issues of women and the percentage of women within the MRC. And I just want to reiterate that this is at all of the levels, as well, especially in scientific positions, as well as senior membership and scientific status. So this is quite unusual for tertiary institutions where your professoriate is not more than 50% women. And so we're seeing and actively encouraging this within the MRC, and we're working on that. We would like to even see that increase over time, but we are very grateful for the acknowledgement that the efforts that we have put in so far are gaining fruit. So from my side, I would just like to acknowledge all the members of the EMC, all the members of the SAMRC that are in this meeting today, and then a special thanks to Professor Chaliza from the board, all the other members of the board, and we thank the board always for their support and their encouragement and their direction. Again, my apologies from Professor Gray, and Honourable Chair, I hand over to you with thanks.
Thank you very much, Vice President, with your team for the responses. I'm very happy with your response towards my question. But let me also check with honorable members. Honorable members, are your questions all answered?
Mine was very, very well answered, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Stumo.
Chair, we welcome the responses, and we indeed are proud of such kind of service. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Chairperson.
Honorable members. Yes, Honorable Sheikh Imam, you didn't ask
Yeah,
a
Chair.
question.
Yeah, I
was
had my
speaking
hand up,
with-
and I put it down. Yeah.
Okay. Over to you, Honorable Imam.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairperson. When you didn't when you started speaking to them, I thought, let me not interrupt you, so I put it down. But my apologies for that. I think my question to them is, ideally in a country, we would like to go to a preventative healthcare system. And you will accept and appreciate that people are dying at a very young age, and they say you are what you eat, and 80% of the diseases it is reported is caused by what people eat in this country. So my question is, what are you going to do about addressing this particular problem with the high levels or incidence of death in the country at a very young age currently, and the number of reported cases, and I think my colleagues have spoke about some of the other health conditions. Like, I'll give you a good example, cancer. Now, I have met somebody on the plane one day, and she indicated that her research tells us that dishwashing liquid is one of the root causes of cancer, and that is what she says. Now, what I want to know is, have you ever considered these products that are produced daily? And we're talking about diabetes, which South Africa, I think, is fast becoming one of the, it's the highest killers in this country, diabetes, number one. Do you remember the University of KZN did a research on lung infections, diseases to do with the lungs, which is cancer, asthma and things, particularly in the Meerwent, Meerbank, Lemontville, Oosterwil area. Could you perhaps tell us if you know anything about it? If not, would you be able to look into that and tell us exactly what is the findings, so that we could rather move away from this, the curative system that we got at the moment, and move to one similar to Cuba, which would prevent our people from getting sick and dying, particularly at early ages. And if you can then tell me, what is the reason that there is, if there was any research done, why is there such a high prevalence of asthma in the country, even at very young age of children, something that we've never experienced previously? And lastly, do you get funding from World Health Organization, FDA, and all these international institutes? And if you do, does it have any impact on your independence or objectivity? Thank you, Chairperson. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Honorable Sheikh Imam. I would assume that other members, you responded very well, Vice President. I will also hand over to you to answer the questions of Honorable Sheikh Imam. I will give you only 2 minutes to respond.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair, and thank you very much, Honourable Member Imam, for those great questions. 2 minutes is not enough to answer questions about many, many diseases, but I can tell you that we are actively researching in all of those areas. So our non-communicable diseases research unit, our burden of disease research unit focuses on those. Our health prevention and disease our health promotion and disease prevention unit. This is a cluster of 4 areas, NCDs. It is our alcohol, tobacco, mental health unit, as well as our environmental health unit, is particularly focused at how do we package health promotion. Health promotion, as you say, is so important to prevent disease from happening in the first instance. And in the past, we used to think that was by giving health information and improving health literacy. We're now aware that it's much more than that. It's thinking about what people eat, what their environment is like, what is their socioeconomic situation. And so all of those things are being looked at through the lens of evidence-based medicine and evidence-based policy, rather than just focusing on one particular area or the other. We're well aware that you're right, that we're seeing cancers, non-communicable diseases increase. They're increasing across the entire world, and they're increasing for different reasons in different parts of the world. So, for example, cardiovascular disease in the US is going down for the first time in decades because the rates of smoking are going down. But for example, diabetes is going up because the rates of unhealthy weight are going up. So we need to look at all of these different areas and unpack them. Things like the publication and a bit of work that you heard about on the plane, we put those into collated evidence. So you can certainly have one particular study that shows one thing, and perhaps 17 other studies show things differently. And this is where our Cochrane unit that look at combined synthesis, so multiple studies with hundreds and thousands of participants, and to try and get a sense of what the combined issues are and how we can deal with them. So that is one of the big areas that we work in. And when we have a question from an honourable minister, honourable member as yourself, or from the Department of Health around a research question, we then work on combining evidence and understanding the quality of that evidence to end up with clinical guidelines and potential policies. My last few seconds is just about funding from the FDA and the WHO. We don't receive funding from the FDA. They are not a funding agency. They're a bit like SAMRC, so they are a regulations agency, not a funding agency. We work very closely with the WHO, but we always maintain our scientific integrity. It doesn't make us, we remain objective. The core element is science, rather than that we are swayed by the funders. Our CEO and president likes to talk always about decolonization of health research. I'm sure you've all heard us say that, because we focus on the health needs of our country and our people, rather than the health or research needs of any funding agency. And they are aware of that at the time that we enter our agreements. Hopefully I've managed to stay under the 2 minutes. Thank you very much, Honourable Chair, and back over to you.
Thank you very much, Vice President. You have answered all our questions, and we really appreciate the good work that you are doing as MRC. I'm going to give you a few seconds for just a last comment from you, Vice President.
I'm just having a look at the at our colleagues online to see if our if Professor Chaliz is still with us. I think he has left us. I know that he had some clinical work to attend to. From the point of view of the EMC and the SAMRC, we just thank you again for the opportunity. I'm going to hand over to Professor Tim Tucker as a representative of the SAMRC board, just to close on behalf of the board. In fact, apologies, I see very gratefully that Professor Johnny Mahlangu has managed to join us. Professor Mahlangu, I'm not sure how much you have heard, but we've been asked just to close. I wonder if you could do that on behalf of the board.
Thank you very much, VP, and I apologize to honorable members for having joined late due to conflicting commitments. It remains for me to thank again the honorable members of the Portfolio Committee for allowing us and giving us this opportunity to be able to interface to take questions, to clarify issues, and certainly to share the agenda that we have just shared. It remains for me to also thank the members of the executive committee of the MRC who are actually leading this presentation, and to thank everyone for attending. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Let me take this opportunity as my closing remark to thank the DMC and also to thank honorable members and to thank the Department of Health, particularly the Secretary, Ms. Machalamba, and just to remind honorable members that tomorrow we are still going to have the meeting. The Department of Health will also do a briefing on their APP and budget for the financial year 2023 and 2024. So we have come to the end of our portfolio committee meeting. Thank you very much for the opportunity that you gave me to share the meeting. I really appreciate the opportunity. The meeting stands adjourned.